again. It is a great pleasure for us to have here Salvador Simón. Big round of applause for him. He's the director of Buñuel and the Maze of the Turtles and Dragon Keeper, and he's going to tell us what's the process of directing and telling a story in animation. Hello, good morning, everybody. I have already been introduced. I'm Salvador Simó, and when they called me, they told me, could you give us an inspirational talk on what it means to direct an animation film? I started thinking about this. Really? Inspirational speech on directing an animation movie? Well, I'll try my best. I'll do what you ask me to do, but in reality, there's hardly anything inspirational in directing an animation movie. It's an actual torture that will last 4 years. Although I'll try not to get you too down, and I don't want to have you in a very bad mood. And I started working in animation 35 years ago. One of the first works that I did was commissioned by this gentleman over there, Julio Diaz, in a studio in Madrid. Alfonso Producciones, that's the name of the studio. He's a legend in our field. And what really fascinated me about this world, because I came from, I had a background in law and I was a bit at a loss, but I felt fascinated by the fact that it didn't matter who were you a relative to, but the only thing that mattered was what you had on your CV, on your resume. So being able to do things on your own, being able to prove that your work was depending on the effort that you were ready to put into it, was something that fascinated me. Met Julio. I came to Madrid. I used to live in Barcelona, and I thought that I was going to spend all days long knocking on every studio in Madrid with my portfolio with me. And Julio said, well, this is what you can start doing here. And those were my first jobs as an animator. It is true that before that I had worked in other things. I had started painting and drawing, and I had done many, many things. But the first animation job that I had was commissioned by him, and that's how I started my career. During all of these years, I've done a bit of everything, a bit of everything. I was an animation assistant. I worked for Disney. I did many things. I was drawing, and when I was on my 30s, I don't know exactly when, I said, I feel like doing a short film. I feel like telling a story. And then I started wondering, what story? How do I do it? And I realized that I had no idea how to do it. I knew how to animate, I knew how to draw a shot and how to prepare certain frames and things like that. But what about animating a story? I was living in Barcelona at that time. I was working as a freelance for Disney in a very stable way. So I decided to study movie direction. And I joined a school in Barcelona, the Center for Cinematic Studies in Barcelona, and I started direction, live action movie in direction, and I realized that I had no fucking idea on how to tell a story. But I realized that a lot of people within the animation world had no idea as well, because there was the cinematic narrative was not being explained the same way. We were having a first shot, general shot, but the evolution of the cinematographic narrative that we've seen uh, in real movies was pretty much disconnected from the field of animation. And I thought that this was going to be the path that I had to take, trying to apply the cinematographic language to animation. And from there, I got into visual effects. I started working in Narnia, Skyfall, Jungle Book, Pirates of the Caribbean, and so on and so forth. For many years, I worked in visual effects movies. And that led me to my first job as a director when they offering me directing an 3D animation movie in Asia, in Thailand. And when I got this job offer, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I couldn't point in a map at Thailand. I had to look for it. But I said, wow, what the heck, I'm going there. And I spent 3 years directing a show there. And I had directed a couple of short films, but that was a bit more serious. I had a huge responsibility over my shoulders. I was working for a studio and I was the director. And that was a bit complicated for me, but I thought, well, you know what you have to do? Get prepared, get ready for everything, do not improvise. So every morning I woke up at 6 in the morning, and at 7 they opened the Starbucks downstairs, and I started working at 9. So from 7 to 9 I spent 2 hours drawing all the episodes, thumbnails, and everything was prepared. And when they said the cape of the character, is it blue or is it green, and I knew why it had to be blue or green. I never left anything subject to improvising, and I didn't know how to answer any of the questions. I asked for some time to think about it, because when you are directing a team who is expecting from you to know what you want, to be directed by that director. And I have some limitations just like anyone else, but I had to prepare, and I have to know what to ask them to do. And one of the things that an animation director has to do is to do their homework, is to prepare for everything, for absolutely everything. I've bumped into directors that whenever they arrive at the studio say, oh, show me the animatics, it's not fully working, give it another thought. What do you mean, give it another thought? If you are going to be the director in a live action movie, you are going to decide whether if it's going to be a general shot, the frame is going to be like this or that. You have to decide that. It's not for anyone else to decide it. When I've worked with storyboarding, I'm demanding the director to tell me what to do, because I'm not going to be doing their job. I'm not being paid to do the job. So when I take a storyboarder to do their job, I tell them what I want them to do. And if they move a bit from what I want them to do, I tell them, because I've spent hours and hours and hours thinking, how do I want to tell the story? If I want a general shot, if I want an aerial shot, or what type of shot I wanted. And what's what the director do, whether if it's a live action film or it's an animated film. There's people very talented for improvising, but I'm not talented for that, and I need to be well prepared for everything.
He tenido que mairar porque siempre me despisto.
I always lose thread and I have to reread my notes. I'm sorry about that.
Os cuento todo.
I'm telling you all of these things because actually I didn't want to be in the movies. I wanted to be an engineer. But life has taken me down this road. And I remember when I was 14, I was given my first computer, which was a 16K Spectrum that used BASIC for programming, and I programmed graphic representations of Rodinger's ideas. So I was a bit of a freak. I was very geeky, and programming and logics, all of those things have always been my passion. I've always been programming things. It's something that is forbidden to me because it's a bit of an addiction, because as soon as I start programming, the universe just disappears and I can't program. It's like alcoholics who can drink alcohol. I can't program. And I've done it, but I got lost down the rabbit hole. The world just disappears. I'm telling you all of these things because somehow what I've done my whole life is try and understand how to tell a story. And that is why when I went to the school to learn how to be a movie director, I realized that I had no idea how to do it. And I had no idea how to do it because it's as though you were trying to write poetry in Russian. If I were to tell you, let's write a poetry in Russian, what's the first thing you need to learn? You need to learn Russian, obviously. And then you have to read loads of poetry, and then you would have to learn all of the rules for metrics and rhyming and all of the different currents in poetry. Well, this is the same thing. If you don't learn the language, well, you can try, obviously, and you might create something that's good, but I'm not one of those. I need to understand the language and understand things. So to me, it's always been a search, trying to tell a story. It's always been a challenge to see how I can do this. And you will say, why animation? Well, you're going to laugh about this, but because of the smell of coffee, wood, and paper. I know it might seem silly, but that's how I started. When you entered an animation studio, you could always smell freshly made coffee, wood, and paper, right, Julio? And somehow that just reaches your soul. It is part of your beginning. And I know that nowadays it's more complicated, isn't it? Because I would recommend for you to try and find that that smell of coffee. It doesn't have to be coffee, it's a metaphor, but try and look for your origins because there is magic in that. Because when you see for the first time that your drawings come to life, it is an amazing feeling. It is as though, wow, magic has happened. Suddenly that character has come to life with just a small detail. Obviously, you could change the model, you could make it bigger, smaller, but there is something that makes that animation have that magic to it. And that somehow is something that you cannot forget. I've also done things in fiction, and it's great. Fiction is great because it's not as slow as animation. You know, in animation projects, a movie takes 3 to 4 years, but in live action, it's just 1.5 years. So it's like a marathon or just 100 meters. So sometimes you need to run a 300-meter race to just get rid of the weight of the marathon race. And I've always tried to feel that again, to feel that the smell of freshly made coffee, that magic when you tell a story and when you see that the characters and everything comes to life. And since I started drawing and animating, for me, animation as well as well, when we worked with animators, it was very special, and you also had to learn how to act because an animator is an actor in the end, an actor who's very shy because instead of being in front of the camera, he's behind the camera or they're behind the camera. But you need to know how to act. You need to know why you're batting an eyelid or not, and it is something that the director needs to work on with the animators. Live action director will work with real actors and will tell actors, I'm sure you've seen it many times over, no, be a bit more dramatic or a bit more this or a bit more that. Well, with animation, it's the same thing. You have to work with animators and you have to work with the animator director and say, no, I need it to be more dramatic or move it a bit more, move it a bit less. So this is a very complex work. And it is part of that process of engineering, which is telling a story in animation. I always say that telling a story, and in fiction it's the same case, it's like trying to make 2 and 2, adding together making 5, to sum up to 5. Because what you're saying does not make sense or it doesn't have any logic to it. And very often we think, I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the first Indiana Jones's movies, there's a moment where the meanies take a plane and they cross most of the map on a plane, and they take a ship and they get there at the same time. Logically, that's impossible, isn't it? But when you when you watch the movie, you don't really care. That's why I'm telling you that 2 plus 2 is not 4, it's 5. Because what we are as directors, what we are is manipulative beings. We manipulate our audience, and we have to make the audience believe things that are not true. Nowadays, thanks to special effects, we can see Marvel movies where people fly and where all of these things happen, but that is not true. These movies are almost animation-like, and the magic of animation is that we create a world that does not exist, and we create it from scratch, from the first minute. When you create an animation movie, the spectator, the public is there waiting for anything that you will sell them. They will buy anything, but you have to set the rules for this world that you're creating, and they will believe it. And within these rules, you can tell them that story. Okay? And as I said, with fiction, well, there are moments where it's a mix between animation and live action. And for that, very often we use a cinematographical narrative, which is what I like. It really turns me on. I'm sorry for saying it like that, but it's true. It turns me on. Let me see. How can I explain this? There is a series when I teach my classes, I always recommend it. I don't mind, but there is Odyssey, Story of Film. It is a series, a documentary series. It's 10 to 12 episodes, and it talks about the evolution of the cinematographic terminology from the beginning until nowadays. And it tells you that at the beginning of everything, people, when they started making movies, they would have general shots, you know. And then someone said, well, what if I zoom in? And they said, ooh. So that's how they started having this shots. And the first things, usually it was outdoors. And then someone said, how about we just get inside the house, and we started doing inside shots. So the cinematographical terminology has changed, it has evolved, and things that were considered a mistake previously are now part of the language, of how we use that language. I'm sure you have already heard talk about the 2/3 rule, how you compose your shots and so on, these thirds. Well, does anybody know the series Mr. Robot? It really cannot respect less this rule, and it does so because it causes us a feeling amongst the audience. So the rules are there to break them and know how to use them. Do you know the rule of the axis? You know that you have to respect the axis. Always the axis have to be respected. Well, there is a movie by Yasuhiro Ozu, Tokyo Story, and in the first sequence it just decides to jump over that axe. Do you think that Master Yasuhiro Ozu has done that without noticing? No, he did it for a very specific reason, because that would have an effect on how the spectator feels with regards to what is happening on the screen. So you say, wow, all of these elements are actually helping me tell this story, because telling a story is not just what happens in these images. We're not just an audience, but rather, depending on how we use our camera, we will cause a feeling or rather amongst our audience. So it's quite amazing, isn't it? And you've all heard talk about Godard. There is a movie, À bout de souffle, which until that time, what we called a jump cut was a mistake. Do you know what a jump cut is? It's when we cut from one forefront to another, which is the same from the first person, from the same person, and there is no difference between the one and the other. So it's a jump cut that is a bit weird. And À bout de souffle in that movie, I don't know how it was called in Spanish, something about an escape. And he does different, Godard does different jump cuts, and that causes a feeling amongst the audience. So what was a mistake previously now became another tool for storytelling. And I remember that at the beginning when I was studying, when I was doing animation, obviously, but everyone told you, oh, you have to try not include the character in the center, not make it symmetric, because that is not dynamic enough. But you all know Wes Anderson, don't you? Mr. Wes Anderson does that all of the time, and Kubrick as well. So in the end, do you think who's right? Well, everyone is right. Why? Because the language is actually that. It's a constant evolution.
Todos estos señores han sido,
And all of these people are and still are these masters that we used to learn from on a daily basis. And I have so much to learn still. And I hope I'll never get to the day where I say I know it all. Because if I know it all, then I should just stop. Because what's beautiful about this profession is to keep on learning, to keep on trying to do things the best we can. Another important element when we tell a story is the script. And yes, as I would have liked to be an engineer. I'm a frustrated engineer. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I must have touched my microphone, says the speaker. I try to understand how a script is made because telling a story, obviously, I have read thousands of books about how to write a screen, and we have the first act, second act, third act. But then you see that in different cultures, it is not the same way. You might have 5 acts, and in other places they will tell you it's 4 acts, and the arc is different. So let's clarify things. You have the hero's journey, so it's loads of different things, and it's a bit chaotic, isn't it? So I usually, for the movies that I like and some that I don't like, what I do is I try to break them down into different parts and understand the script and how it works. It's when I was a kid, hasn't it happened to you? When I was a kid, I was usually in timeout because I would take my father's screwdriver and I would dismantle things, and I was always punished. I was always in timeout. But with scripts, I have the same issue. I try to do the same thing. I try and find how the story structure can actually change the focus on that story. I don't know if you've heard talk about a movie called Into the Wild. It's a movie. I'm going to spoil it for you, but it really is worth watching. It is based in a book. Actually, it's a real story of a boy who lives in California, and when he finishes his degree in university, he decides to go and live in the wild, to Alaska. He goes to Alaska, and the story tells that story since the moment he leaves university until the end when he dies in Alaska. Okay? That's the book. And this movie, when they did it, it was directed by Sean Penn.
lees el libro, dices, ostras, ¿qué le va a pasar?
When you read the book, you think, what is going to happen to this boy when he gets to Alaska? What is going to happen? And when he gets to Alaska, what is going to happen? So your focus is he going to get there or not? When they made the movie, they said, I don't want that to be the focus. And actually, the movie starts with him getting to Alaska and dying. So they spoil the movie for you, and you think, have they ruined the movie for me? No, they haven't. They just changed the focus, because now you're not waiting to see if he gets there or not. You're just waiting to see the why. Why is he doing all of these things? So you change the focus on the story, and it can be really silly at times. It's very subtle, just changing the order of things. And then there are other movies which are movies with wonderful structures. I don't know if you have watched The Red Violin. It's a movie that I think it was launched in the year 2000. It wasn't very famous, but it tells you the story of a violin all through history and the people who played it, the people who had it, and it has a marvelous structure to it. I don't want to spoil it for you because it's really a movie that I recommend watching, but I'm sure that you all have watched Love Actually by Richard Curtis, or for instance About Time by Richard Curtis as well. These are scripts that are amazing because the director, with About Time for instance, it's a movie that starts and you think that it is about one thing, but when you get to the equator of the movie, you realize that it is about something completely different and you hadn't even realized it. So this script writer has manipulated you in a way that that has forced you to just wow yourself. You hadn't realized all of these things, and they take you through an emotional journey. And when that journey finishes and you leave the cinema, you're happy, and you say, "Wow, I really had fun with this movie. Wasn't it great? These 10 years that I spent were, I mean, it was worth my money." And that's a great responsibility, because when you're making a movie, you're not doing it for you. You're not making it for you. You're making it for everyone else, for the audience, for the public who has paid for their ticket. So as directors, we cannot just tell a story because we want to tell the story because we just want to, because that's what we want to do. No, obviously we have to tell the story so that you go through a wonderful time, because otherwise I would be fooling you. That's how I feel things when I go to the movies and I watch a movie, and after some time I go and I finish them. I always stay there until the end. I could fall asleep, but I stay there until the end. And I really enjoy a movie when I leave the cinema theater and I think, what a great time I had. Hasn't it happened to you that you've left the movie saying, what a great time I've just had? And wonder why. Wonder why you have had such a great time with that movie. Why? Do you have an answer? No? What? I'm sorry, what?
No, no, bueno, sí, claro, pero digamos que tus emociones han sido como una montaña rusa, ¿verdad?
But your emotions were there, weren't there? At times you were having fun, sometimes you were sad, and that is what the director actually does. He plays with the public's emotions so that it is a roller coaster of emotions, and so that the audience has fun. And that is why in the American industry they call it entertainment, because it entertains. It's true that maybe they have spun things a bit too far, because now all of the movies are the same, to my taste. But the movies in general, what they try always is to communicate with the audience. It's channel, a communication channel. Because if I start speaking Russian, you're not going to understand what I'm saying, would you? Well, maybe some of you, if you speak Russian, even if I write poetry in Russian, you wouldn't understand me. And if it is a communication channel and you don't understand me, then we have a problem, a communication problem. And it's not about intelligence, right? I think I'm just a run-of-the-mill man. I remember when I went to the cinema school, there was one of my teachers was amazing, Zayed. And I remember that at the time I must have been 30 something, and the rest of the students were your age. They were 20 something. And the teacher told us this one day, you have to watch this movie, The Mirror by, oh, I can't forget the name. The Mirror by Tarkovsky. I was going to say Tchaikovsky, but it's Tarkovsky. And I thought, okay, great. I'm going to watch the movie. And I spent the weekend deciding to watch the movie. But after 10 minutes, I was asleep. And I thought, no, 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 I have to watch it. I have to watch it. So the next day, Sunday morning, with my coffee, I decided to watch the movie. And to me, it was like, I didn't understand anything about that movie. And everyone said, no, it's an amazing movie, spectacular, the best movie in the story, in the history of movies. And I thought, well, I must be really dumb because I haven't understood a single thing. And I thought, well, I'll watch it again. And I just didn't understand it. And in the end, well, we went to class, and the teacher started asking questions and asked if someone understood it, and everyone said, no, it's a perfect movie, this and that. I began to shrink and shrink and shrink. And I thought, well, all of these young people who have understood the movie, and I haven't. I don't know if they understood it or not, but it is something that has taken me some time. But fortunately, that has allowed me to watch the movie, and step by step I tried to start understanding the metaphors and the poetry in this movie. Nowadays, if you ask me, do you understand it? I would say, not quite. I'm still trying. I still have to watch it a few times. So So poetry, even if it is in Russian, you have to try and understand it because it's a communication channel. But you see that there is something there, okay? So there needs to be an effort on your part as well. The spectator has to make an effort, but that is the responsibility of the director. You have to capture your audience so that they will take that step forward, because the audience is sitting down and very often they have their popcorn and their Coke at hand and they're not willing to make any effort whatsoever. So you have to try and infuse them and track them so that they will make an effort and get into the movie, because otherwise it's just one of those movies that just vomit all of the information on top of you, and when you leave the theater you don't remember anything. You just can't remember. A good movie to me is one of those movies when you leave the room you're telling yourself, wow, is this that and that is that, and you're still wondering and you're still asking yourself questions, and then when you watch it with someone else you say, didn't you think that this was this and that was that? Hasn't it happened to you with some movies, those movies that you take home with you? I like those sorts of movies, and I would like to make that sort of movies. I don't know if I managed to do it, but that's what I would like to do, to tell these stories that people take home with them.
Muchas veces, cuando intentamos contar una historia,
But very often when we try to tell a story, we have to wonder, we have to ask ourselves, who cares about this story that I want to tell, right? Because we all have a story we want to tell, but do people really care? Now that you have 30 million different information sources where they tell you stories, TikTok, Instagram, all sorts of stories, platforms, televisions, we have so much information, we have so many stories being told to us that why would my story be more interesting than the rest?
tenemos que preguntarnos
We have to ask ourselves what it is we want to tell and why we want to tell that story, because very often that story, we want to tell it because because it's inside of us and it's happened to us, we felt something, and that's where the secret lies, feeling something. And from then onward, we can try and start building what it is that we felt. And that helps us build that story. Because if we don't have that, then the only thing that we have is just an idea. At best. We can say, oh, I thought of the idea of making a movie about cowboys against aliens.
Guay.
Cool. And? What are you telling with that story? I don't know if you've watched that movie. What does that movie tell? Nothing. So I'm sure that movie will not be coming home with you after the movie's done. I would like for people not to fall asleep when they watch my movies. When you tell a story, well, in the old days, stories would be told by a person, and that person would captivate you when telling that story. Somehow they would say, well, in a faraway country this happened, and then this other thing happened, and then this person came and did this, and in the old days you would be there. I remember my grandfather would tell me stories when I was a kid so that I could fall asleep with my brother. And I can assure you that we wouldn't fall asleep, because sometimes he would tell us stories that were, wow, amazing. But they will tell you the story. My grandfather would tell me that my story and was completely captivated by it. And the next day you would say, no, tell me the same story again. And he would say, but you already know it. It doesn't matter. I want to hear it again, because you believe the story. You were in the story. That is what we have to do when we tell a story. Whether it's an animation or a live action story, we need to captivate that audience. When you have a story to tell, first of all, tell yourselves, what do I want to tell? What part of me is in that story? And very often when I teach my script classes, I always tell the same story. If I tell you now, let's make a short exercise. You have to tell me the story of a man who is in a spaceship. I previously have told you that you have to tell things that are based in your own experience, in your feelings, okay? So you have to tell a story of a man who's in a spaceship And the story starts with that man leaves the planet's orbit and enters the moon's orbit. That's your story from one orbit to the next. And you'll say, but how am I going to tell that story? I've never been in a spaceship, right? Right or not? How many of you have been bored at some point in your lives? How many of you have felt alone? How many of you have been scared? Very often, right? Well, that is what you have to use to tell your story. That is where your story lies. Whether it is a spaceship that goes from here to there, it doesn't really matter. Your story is in what you have felt and what you project with that story. When I was talking to you about the structure of a story, what always comes to mind is a building. My mind, as I told you, is a bit of a square mind. Do you know La Pedrera building in Barcelona? By Gaudí, an architect. You know that it is a, a a wavy building where everything is very organic, very wavy. Well, I encourage you to go online and look for the structure of La Pedrera, Gaudí's building. You will see that it is iron bars that are completely straight with no curve whatsoever. That is the structure that sustains that building. And when we create a script, that structure that we're creating is the one that sustains the story itself. Afterwards, we can obviously add things on, magnificent things, but we need to have that structure. So that is why when we talk about the structure of a story, it is so important to know how we tell the story, how we're going to frame it, what framework will it have, what pace will it have. What I was telling you about the Into the Wild, what is our focus, what is what we want to tell about this story, that he's going to get there or not, or do we want to tell the why he's going to make that trip to Alaska? That is where the secret lies, and that is what is going to define what our structure is actually going to be.
Perdón, volvamos a animación.
Let's go back to animation. Why me? Why animation? Well, the big difference between live action and animation is, well, in live action, in fiction, you have to be very talented. When I started, I wasn't talented at all. In fact, when I started, I was told, do something else because you're not good at drawing. But I'm very stubborn, and I said, you say I'm not? You'll see, you'll see. And it took me longer than it took others, but little by little I started working on that. I'm not saying that I was wonderful, but I did it. And in fiction, when you're going to be shooting, there is a great room for improvisation. And the way we shoot a lot of material, and practically the movie, it's done in the editing. In the editing, you can make sure that the movie is going to work one way or another, but this is not the case for animation. In animation, everything needs to be planned beforehand. There's no room for improvisation or improvement or anything like that. There's nothing that you can use afterwards in the editing. What you have is what you've planned for. That's why it takes so long. You do the animatics and so on, and then you close it, and that's what gets into production. You talk to a producer and you tell them when you finish that you threw away 10 minutes of an animation movie, that person is not going to be sleeping that night because you've thrown into the garbage 300,000 euros or more. That's impossible. That's unacceptable. Here in animation, if you have a fly passing by the shot, it's because you decided that fly to do it. In live action, there's more room for flexibility, and you can take advantage of the fly flying around there. And the times that I've been able to do it, and the times that I've been able to improvise, I've taken advantage of them. It's more interesting. But here is a matter of planning everything. But there is another part that suits me more, which has to do with planning. To me, an animation movie, above all, and what's more interesting is the very first part, script the animation, the structure, the storyboard until you get to the layout. And afterwards, everything is going to be interesting as well. But as a director, it is there where you have to be and give 3000% of yourself. And that leads me to explain to all of you the three phases within an animation project. Probably you all know how to do an animation movie, don't you? You all know that we have a script, then we have the storyboard, the layouts, the animation, everything. You know more or less what's going to happen, but from the director's perspective, things change a little bit. From the director perspectives, there are three phases. The first stage is the one that I was talking about, the creative one, when you're working with the script writer and you're going around all the story. And as a director, I like working with the script writer. Sometimes, such as in Dragon Keeper, I had to work with very close scripts because you join the project later on. And this comes with some disadvantages because really it's not your perspective, it's not your vision. On the contrary, you have to adapt to a vision that's already there, turn it around, and in the process of creation, in the storyboarding process, or from script to the storyboarding, you try to do as much as you want within the circumstances as a director to be able to tell the story in a way that it is entertaining for the audience. Because sometimes the scripts are tremendously boring. I had to read some of the scripts in different stages because I was bored. We're 20 pages and you are like, oh my God, how long is this going to be? 100. Or maybe I'll go have a coffee or tomorrow I'll continue on reading. And then you have to do that movie and you have to make this script, boring script, come to life. So you have to roll up your sleeve and redo practically everything, maintaining what you have in your script, but turning it around and adding your interpretation of the story. Some other times it's different when you're already working in the script and you have a very solid script. From that moment onwards, if you have a very solid script that you've worked on, that's the very best part of them all, which is do to when we see the cinematographic narrative, when you create, when you feel like a filmmaker telling a story, thinking about the audience and how to make sure that the audience is going to laugh at that point in time or not to laugh at that point in time or laughing a bit earlier, or these tricks that you play with the audience. In here they're going to smile, but then afterwards they're going to start laughing frankly. So then you have the layout, and it is there where you fine tune the composition, the narrative, the storytelling, and so on. This part for me is the very best, the one that I enjoy the most. Then it comes the part in which we get into the animation, where we do the modeling, the effects, and all the teams are already working. We get into the real production. The army is advancing, following very strict guidelines, clear guidelines. And there you're not so much a director, but a coach or a psychologist or a psychologist, because you have to work with a team and there can be complications. Everyone is under stress because we have to meet a deadline. You have to make sure that everyone gets along really well, that people is not under pressure. You are under pressure because producers have you under pressure, but you have to hold on that pressure so that your team feels free to work. And the most creative part is working with the animators, and you have to tell them many times, stop, don't move the character so much, because animators had an innate trend, tendency towards moving the characters. I've been an animator and I did it. And if you don't move the characters, there's something inside of you eating you up, like saying, no, you're not doing your job correctly. This character needs to move more and more and more and more. Remember, there is a shot in Buñuel when Ramon Acil is scolding him, and we see the counter shot of Luis Buñuel receiving the scolding of Ramon, and I was like, don't have the character moving. I don't want the character moving at all. You wanna draw the same posture the same way. And the animator added the blink of the eye, and I was like, get rid of the blink of the eye. And I was sent a version with the blinking of the eye, and I saw it in the movie. They made the mistake and they used the old version, and there is an eye blinking against my will because that blinking of the eye made no sense. Why is that? Because when there is no movement is when the audience have to do a little bit of a job. They have to do their part. You all know the Khrushchev effect. You don't know it? This is very brief. In past times in Russia, there was a gentleman who took a character, the shot of a gentleman looking with expressionless, totally expressionless, and the next shot was the one of a coffin with a dead lady inside. At that time, you understood and you saw the sadness of the gentleman. And the next shot was the same person in a dish of soup, and you were like, oh, he's hungry. He looks like he's hungry. But the next one was the same gentleman and a child playing in the park, and you were like already like, oh my God, this gentleman, he might be a pervert. But the face expression on the three shots was exactly the same one. So the um, overlapping of shots it's what creates a feeling amongst the audience. Then in the case of this movie, I didn't need Buñuel to move. To me, that was the Khrushchev effect. That's what we were seeing. And with a single blink of an eye, we were destroying what we were meaning to do. We were destroying that effect. But we tried the best we could. And this part, which is also interesting, in which you are more a psychologist and an emotional coach, I remember that while filming Buñuel, the only thing that was missing was a couch in my office because people came to see what this person did, see what that other person thought or said or whatever. And when you do something wrong, who pays for it is your colleagues. Layout is a very important department within the production because if you have a very bad layout, the animator is not going to be able to do this work. People doing effects cannot do a good job and so on. So at the end, you're going to have them doing work for you, and and that's not their job. You're being paid to do the layout, and you have to assume that responsibility. And sometimes when you're working with 300 people, some people, it's not having a very good day, even if things work out correctly. But that's the function of the director. And the very last stage are the 9, 10 last months of the movie, in which basically your work is to make sure that the producer is not going to spoil and destroy the movie. Why is that? Please understand what I'm meaning to say. The producer doesn't have the movie in their hand. They're working with the cash flow, the numbers, the money, and they see that everyone's having a great time, and they don't see the movie finish. And we see that the delivery or the deadline is coming and nothing's been done, and they became desperate. They became desperate because in an animation movie, the shots do not appear until the very end when we see the renders and all those things. All the work that you've done in the past years start closing, and in a matter of months, in the last 3 months, the movie is totally takes shape and everything is fully finished. But the poor producer cannot see that. And at that time, and I'm sorry, producers, I love you very much and I'm trying to get into production, but at that time, it's like giving a gun to a monkey. They can't do anything. They're on their nerves constantly and they start saying, that's enough, that's enough, that's enough. See what I was telling you before is that if a director, you've done an effort and you've worried of the feeling of the audience when you do a jump cut, when you have an FX in the background, when it is linked with that so that the audience will feel an emotional experience. Someone says that's not necessary, no one's going to see that. You want to kill that person for sure. So you have to really hold on and try to remain calm. You have to be very strong from the psychological perspective because that gentleman is definitely having a stake on the movie because he's invested a lot of millions, but at the same time, you don't want them to spoil the movie. You have to direct a movie thinking that this is team work. It's not, I'm your director. Your ego has to remain at the door because otherwise, you will never be able to do teamwork. You have to be able to do active listening. I always say that a director needs to be surrounded by people that is more talented that he is, that is more knowledgeable. And you have to have a clear perspective. You know that you want to tell your story this way because of this, and that. So when someone says something that is different to what you want to say, you can explain why. And in some people, you say, "Oh, I want to explain this way because I want for the audience to laugh at that time." And you think that the audience is going to laugh at that time, but someone tells you, "But I think if you do it this way, it's going to be better because people is going to laugh more." And you have to be ready to accept. You have to listen just as long as if not different from the perspective that you want to give. This is part of teamwork.
Por eso, cuando hablamos de esa visión que
That's why when we talk about our vision, our perspective, this is linked to what I was talking about before, doing your homework. When you want to tell your story, one of the things that you have to do is to look for your own vision of that story. That's why, as I said before, you have to think about how you feel when you're bored or alone or when you're afraid. That's what makes that story unique. Probably you all know about
empecemos, si empezáramos a que cada uno nos...
Little Red Riding Hood. So if you were to tell it, you will probably tell it in a different way because that story has an impact on everyone on a different way, and that's the perspective of that story. When we started telling the movie of Buñuel at the end, I realized that that movie was explaining how Buñuel tried to find his own vision, his own perspective. He had done the Golden Age and the Lucian dog, but it had Dali's perspective. Dali was the art director practically, but it was my perspective. I was behind all of this. It was my perspective. So he tried to look for his own language, his own vision, and he found it at Las Urdes. Afterwards, he did the Forgotten Ones that had a great connection with the documentary film of Las Urdes, and that's how he found his own voice. So it's very important for you to try to tell your story in your own way. Probably some of you, you're students, and sooner or later you will have to do your own short film or your own project, and probably most of you will say, I want to do a short film that will make Pixar go crazy. It's going to blow Pixar's minds. But to do something like Pixar, we already have Pixar. They're all doing their job in a very good way. So look for your story and your own way of telling that story. Try to be unique, original, authentic. And learning from those who are already there. Of course, we can learn from Pixar and how they tell their stories because some of their stories have been told really, really well. So let's see what can we learn of that. How can we incorporate their knowledge, the knowledge of people who's been working on this for many years that are practically textbooks, and how can we use them in our own way of telling our story?
Es verdad que muchas veces
It's true that often within the world of animation we have people who's very stuck up. They never say hello, they're the very best. But over the course of my career I've met all kinds of people. But I was mentioning this because when I was drawing there was a character that was epic for me. I love how he drew, and he was blinking. You know Glen Keane? Sorry, Glen Keane. He's an animator who did Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and so on. And the way he drew was spectacular. I got to meet him and I worked for a whole week with him. And I was fascinated by that person because he was extremely humble, very close to you, someone who was like, I was no one. I was an absolute no one at that time. He was mythical and I wasn't up to him, but he was very respectful. He understood where you were. He was very humble and he was very helpful. He always tried to help. So I said, when I grow up, I want to be like him. It is true that I met other people that I'm not going to mention that were very good on their job, maybe even better than Glenn, but they were very stuck up. And I didn't want to be a stuck up.
Cosas de esta industria y el mejor consejo que os puedo dar.
One of the best things in this industry, and that's the best advice that I can give you, is to be humble because we still have a lot of things to learn. No one knows everything, and telling a story is not a mathematical work. There is a mathematical part, there is a part that has to do more with engineering, but there is another part that has to do with your gut feeling. That's the magic that we were talking about. The smell of coffee, paper, and wood that makes you feel that magic when you see characters being brought to life. And the combination of them both makes you do beautiful things.
Cuando ¿cómo vamos de hora? Vale.
How are we doing time-wise? Well, when I was told that I had to give you this presentation, I thought, what am I going to be talking about? What can I tell them? Because when I was your age, I also went to many conferences, people telling you about their lives, and they said, I've worked for DreamWorks and I've done this and that, and DreamWorks is really cool. But I got out of the conference and I got out as I got in, with no more knowledge, no further knowledge. And some weeks ago, I live now in Malaga, in a small village near Malaga, close to a mountain, and on Sunday morning I trekked with my dog. And I was like today, jeans, the same boots, my t-shirt, a small backpack with a bottle of water and a small hat, a straw hat, half broken. So let's go up the mountain. And on the way there, it was very early in the morning, we found people that came with their very tight bionic fluorescence clothing, cool sneakers that probably cost them a fortune. They are looking really good, visible 100 meters away. And I was like, oh, I'm here to listen to the birds. But mid-mountain, they were stopping there, hardly breathing, and I continued on walking at my own pace until I made it up to the summit. And this is a bit of the same thing, the animation world. This is a long run. This is a long race. This is not a 100 meters sprint, but it's a marathon. Doing a film in animation is climbing a mountain, always going up, a few moments downhill, and there are moments in which you feel like quitting. In my career, every month and a half, 2 months, I feel like quitting. Julio, how many times have you wanted to quit? Never. Oh my gosh, you just spoiled my presentation. I have meant to quit several times because to me it's a challenge, and oftentimes I don't feel up to the challenge, but I couldn't because it's in my blood. Just like when you are climbing a mountain, just like when you're running a marathon and you cannot quit, but you feel like quitting because it's hard. It's really hard. But if you consider this in a humble way and you feel like, oh, I'm going to make it to the summit at my own pace, but I'll make it to the summit. Once I was told, When you do this type of exercise, it's important that your steps don't go faster than your heart. And that's a bit of the same thing. Do not intend to run. We have to learn a lot. People that just came out of a school and it's like, don't worry, I'll give you a new opportunity. But what's your experience? Being talented is okay, but talent without effort is nothing. Picasso said it. 95% transpiration, 5% inspiration. That's a bit of the same. Another thing, and with this I'm going to finish, but another thing that I wanted to tell you, and this is written here, when someone comes, and not so long ago I had a person coming, it was the friend of a friend, and she said, oh, I just finished studying something in animation and I wanted to get into this animation world, and she said, I have a project. When I hear those words, I start sweating, like in a manga movie.
Cuando uno está empezando,
You're starting, you are the project. You have to deem yourself the project of your life. The project of doing a long film, the idea, and so on. Everyone has a project, don't they? How many people here? How many people here doesn't have an idea to do a project? One, two. I don't know how many of us here. All the rest of the people have an idea to do a project and to shoot a film. Don't you think it is better to consider yourself the project? You have to be your own project, learning everything ahead of you. You will have time in the future to do that project. If it's so good, put it on a drawer because it doesn't have an expiry date. Be prepared so when you have the opportunity, you can take it out of the drawer. But now you're starting and you still have a lot of things to learn. When I started, and this is totally true, I was told, Salva, do something else. You're not good for this. You're not good for this. My drawings were terrible, terrible. But thanks to someone telling me this, I rolled up my sleeves and I started learning. I spent months and months and months and months drawing absolutely everything. When I got to work for Disney, I was there as an animation assistant. At that time, they needed the typical Disney layout, the fine and the thicker one, and they wanted someone who had a lot of experience doing that. And I had to do a test, and I had 2 months to prepare. I spent 2 months taking drawings. I was taking these drawings with ink and the quill, and hours after hours doing the same drawing, erasing, drawing, erasing, until my hand was capable of doing it in an impeccable way. Then when I got the pencil, that came out wonderful, absolutely wonderful, but I knew that that was not my strong suit. That was not my strong suit, and if I hadn't known that I wasn't able to do it, I wouldn't have been able to correct it as well. When I started working, I wasn't capable of putting a character in a three-dimensional space. I wasn't controlling perspective. I wasn't attending any drawing school, any fine arts school. So when I realized that I had no idea, I rolled up my sleeve and started rehearsing, practicing, and that became my big, strong suit, placing characters in a three-dimensional element and knowing how to put a character within a space. So, and with this I finish. You are the project. You have to be the project. You have to deem yourself your own project because this is a long run. This is not a 100-meter sprint, but a marathon. If you run too fast at the very beginning, you're going to burn out. And with this, I finish, and you have time for questions if you want to ask a question. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Salvador.
Thank you so much, Salvador. Will anyone like to ask a question?
No. Un segundito. ¿No?
I wanted to ask, since you spoke very much about planning and programming, haven't you tried to participate in a video game project since you like animation? And programming, I programmed a video game for Apple years ago that it was called the X game. I did a programming in SDK that's called Lua, and I published it for a few years, but since I didn't advertise it, it was there in a drawer, and then it was taken out. And it was an animation, 2D animation game. But that's how I learned that I wasn't going to do that in the future, because the 2 months that I spent doing that programming, my life disappeared. And your life has to be much more than that. You might want to have a partner, a family, and so I'd rather have human contact, working with people, working as a team, and being able to go and have a beer with my colleagues. That's what's really beautiful in the world of animation, and I don't want to lose that. We have another question down there. So, for someone who knows for sure that they want to tell stories and who wants to tell stories, maybe not becoming a director, but for someone who's very clear about the fact that they want to tell stories, what will be your advice? To study movie direction. First, to study movie direction, irrespective if you're going to be working in live action or in animation. And that's what let me find out that I had no idea. And from that moment onward, I start telling stories, short films, and so on. Sometimes it's very important to know the means, the channel that you're going to be working in, knowing how things work, whether it's in live action or animation. So people in live action have worked with the microphones and with the sound, seeing and finding out how the industry works, but with a clear goal in mind and losing sight of the goal. You're going to climb up the mountain, that's your goal. So becoming a director might be your goal if you're starting putting microphones on the characters, you know? On that Sunday that I decided to climb to the mountain, after 2.5 hours of climbing, we have already reached the summit, and there was another summit a little bit farther back. It was a 5-minute walk, but I had stopped in that summit in order to give some water to my dog. And I sat there and I was seeing there the summit, and I told myself, okay, let's go. Let's go. Let's try to walk this last final 5-10 minutes. It was only 300 meters away. And I said to myself, no, this is a goal that I'm going to have for some other day. And we went down. For me, the satisfaction of deciding not to do that was greater than than doing it. Why? I don't know. I'm not totally sure. I'm thinking about it. But the satisfaction of enjoying the journey there, the climbing there, not thinking that my life depends on whether if you're going to make it to that other extra summit or not. I had a great time going up the mountain with my dog, and that's what matters to me, enjoying the journey, enjoying the way you get there, and you will see, not how everyone is going to make it to the summit, but even if you only make it halfway, if you're having fun, that doesn't make you better or worse. What matters is that you're enjoying your life and you're enjoying the journey, to learn while you get there, to have good time while you get there, because that's what matters. Because this profession is a hard profession. Those who are telling you that it is a wonderful, super cool world, it's lying to you. It's a super tough, with full of people and very good people. But anyone can make it, because that only depends on you. That's why I felt attracted by the storytelling world, because everything depended on the efforts that I was ready to make, nothing else. And that's my advice.
Hay otra pregunta.
There's another question here, Salvador. With what you told us about drawing, doesn't a moment just come about where you think that it's too late to learn something new and to be capable of doing something new? No, never. So that part that you were telling us about the fact that you were not ready for this, you were not made for this, are there other ways of overcoming that? I don't know. Really, when they told me that, I was actually crushed. But well, sometimes if you tell me not to do something, I will do it. So it depends on your personality as well. Maybe you will be frustrated, you will cry, and that was it. I was frustrated and I cried, and then I said, is that real? Is that really true? No, I'll just put my body and soul into it, and I will not give up. You have to be patient. You have to be very patient and be persevering, and you have to believe in yourself. That doesn't mean that your ego needs to be huge. Those are two different things. But it's true that it is only up to you. Actually, when I was in Thailand, we had, I think the second year we had, how do you call it? We had interns, we had internships who came from a school there, and we had 6 to 7 interns coming working with us. And there was one intern who every day I would leave late and he would stay until late with me. He saw me come by and would say, Salvador, what about this or that? He was always looking forward to learn. And actually he wasn't very good. He wasn't very good. He wasn't very good animating. And the moment came about when the internship ended, these 3 months ended, and the owner of the studio said, we're going to keep this and that guy. And this boy was not going to stay. And I said, take those 3 if you want, but take this one as well. Because this one is going to get really far, because he is always willing. In 3 years, he was the best animator we had at the studio, the best. And I'm talking miles from the best. And I've seen him in London and many different places, and he's a spectacular animator. So in the end, that guy, when he started, he didn't have any talent. He was actually bad. But he worked on it. And sometimes it's just about that, about working, about putting the effort. And that is why he knew what his project was. He was his own project. So nothing is impossible, really. And it's never too late. I started studying as a director, as a movies director, when I was 30-something years old. And look at me now. And let me tell you something. It's actually better. Because if I had... I mean, Buñuel was a relative success. I mean, we got many awards, but if that had hit me, that success had hit me when I was 20-something years old, I would have become a grade A asshole. Really, I mean it. And with age, you realize that, well, sometimes you do things right and people like them, and sometimes you make mistakes, and that's all right. It doesn't matter, because what you've done is enjoy the ride and try and tell the stories with your vision, with your way of seeing it. And when you're done, well, then you go to the next, and that people like it, and well, that's great. And when people tell me, oh, I really liked your project, I think, oh, great, thank you so much. I love that people like my project. I did it so that you would like it, and if it works, well, that's great. That gives me that feeling of work well done. Now, awards, they're great, but when you go back home, that's it. I mean, it's just a statue that's there on a shelf filled with dust. And they don't give you more jobs because you have loads of awards. At least it's not my case. So it's never too late. There is one last question here, Salvador, just behind the streaming team. Yes, hi, I wanted to know. It's actually a two-for one. After having worked for small animation companies and big animation companies, which one do you like most? Or how many do you need? How many small companies do you need to work in to reach a big one? It's a weird question, I know. No. There isn't a rule. There isn't a golden rule. I would say that you always learn something. In all of the companies, you learn something. In big companies, you are just a small cog in the machinery, and you understand how these big projects work. And in a small company, you are a bit of a jack of all trades. You understand how smaller projects work with more stress to them. But I could not say this one's better than that one. I would say both. You have to go through both experiences, because these are experiences that you will like more or less depending on your personality. I have many friends who are currently working in Huerta, or here working in Vancouver, working for big companies and so on, and they're very, very happy, and they don't want to get out of that. That's what they really like. Now, if you ask me to be there, I wouldn't be happy. Maybe I will have it, or I have done it so that I can pay my invoices, but after a few months, I would simply be pulling my hair, wouldn't it? But I would do it. I would do it because you have to work and you have to pay your mortgage. But you always learn something from all experiences. You do learn something. I think that each of us have our own experiences, and we all have our tastes, and they're all obviously fully respectable. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Salvador. Big round of applause for you.
Gracias por venir hoy, por estar con nosotros.
Thank you so much.